A woman arrived at a gas station, and she was behaving really odd. When the security guard saw what she was doing, he immediately turned pale. Earl sat in his usual spot at the gas station, watching the pumps through the security cameras. It was a familiar routine at his late afternoon gas station shift. He scanned each car filling up, making sure everything went smoothly. It was a slow day, and as he watched the screens, his eyes grew tired from the monotony. Suddenly, a flicker of movement on one screen caught his attention. At pump number 3, a woman was acting strange. The woman was dressed in a white jacket and white shorts, and she stood by the pump, but she was not filling a car. Instead, she was bent over and fiddling with something near the gas tank. Earl squinted as he leaned closer to the monitor. In her hand, he saw a bright yellow plastic container, the kind people used for lawnmowers or generators. This was strange. People don't usually buy gasoline in cans at gas stations. Earl sat up straighter as he watched the woman keep doing whatever it was she was doing. The woman wasn't acting normal. She kept pumping gasoline into the container, not the car parked beside her, and her movements were hurried and nervous. Was she stealing gas? Earl grabbed his radio, ready to call over to the attendant, but he saw that it was not functioning. Earl decided to get down there himself. He walked down to the pump and marched right to the strange woman. "Excuse me, miss," he called out. "Can I help you with something?" The woman at the pump jumped. She glanced around nervously and saw the guard standing right behind her. Before he could say another word, she capped the container and bolted for her car. Before Michael could react, she started the car and zoomed off into the streets. Michael frowned. What was that all about? Siphoning a few gallons of gas won't get you very far these days, he thought. Earl shook his head, feeling confused. He turned and headed back to his post. Well, back inside the stuffy security booth, Earl replayed the footage. It didn't make any sense, whatever the woman was doing. He put down the radio and settled back into his chair, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. He kept an eye on the spot where the woman had vanished. Just as he was about to convince himself that it was nothing, something caught his eye again. The camera picked up a glimpse of the woman returning. Moments later, this time without the car, she crouched by a different pump, fiddling with a thin tube in the gas nozzle. It looked like she was trying to suck gas out of the leftover fuel left in the hose. Earl's blood pressure shot up. This was no mistake. This woman was definitely siphoning gas. Not on my watch, he thought that he quickly bolted down from his booth and ran into the open of the station. As he got next to her, he shouted with a firm voice this time, "Hey, you! With the pump, too! Stop what you're doing!" The woman froze and glanced around wildly. As soon as she spotted him coming towards her, she ripped the tube out of the pump before Earl could grab hold of her. She was off like a shot and ran in between parked cars. Earl slammed the radio down in frustration. She was gone again. He couldn't believe how fast she was. Earl angrily returned to the booth. He watched the cameras like a hawk, and to his complete surprise, the woman reappeared within minutes. She was back at it, and she had a tiny thin tube snaking into the gas tank this time. Earl wasn't going to let her get away. He raced out of his booth, determined to catch her red-handed. But when he came out, she ran off at the speed of a rabbit, just like she had done the last 2 times. Earl sprinted outside, hoping to catch her at the edge of the parking lot. But by the time he reached the street, the woman was nowhere to be seen. She had run across the parking lot and disappeared into the shadows behind the gas station. Earl stared dumbfounded. What on earth was going on? He stood there, catching his breath and feeling defeated, but he wasn't about to give up. Though he stalked back inside, and this time his eyes were glued to the monitor, and to his horror, there she was again. This time she was targeting a parked car, using the tube to siphon gas from its tank. This couldn't go on. Earl grabbed the radio, his voice tight with anger. Security to attendant, we've got a gas thief at pump number 3, need backup. He raced out the door once more, determined to catch her this time, but just like before, the woman was a blur. She heard his shouts and saw him running towards her, so she took off like a scared rabbit. Earl chased her around parked cars, and his legs were burning, but he just couldn't keep up. Exhausted and frustrated, he watched her disappear into the streets again. Feeling frustrated, Earl raced outside. He scanned the parking lot, but the woman had vanished. He checked behind the building, his heart pounding. This was getting ridiculous. He swore he saw a flash of movement by a row of parked vans, but by the time he got there, the woman was gone. Panting and defeated, Earl stumbled back to his station point 4 times now. He'd been outsmarted by this gas-guzzling ghost, but this time something was different. A strange calmness washed over him. Maybe chasing her wasn't the answer. He decided to wait. He settled back into his chair, with his eyes glued to the monitor. Time crawled by, minutes turned into an hour. Just when he thought she wouldn't return, she popped up on the screen. This time, Earl didn't rush out. He waited until the woman started fiddling with the gas pump again. While he watched her, a plan was forming in his mind. As the woman began filling her strange container, Earl darted out the back door, taking a shortcut through the employee area. He burst through the front doors just as she finished filling the container. But this time, he had the advantage of surprise. He ran towards her, yelling, "Stop right there." As he burst through the door, he had caught her completely off guard. The woman whipped around, startled, as if she had expected him to give up. She dropped the tube, and with a desperate cry, she pushed past Earl and sprinted across the parking lot. This time, however, her luck ran out. The chase was on again, and Earl was closer that he cut her off before she reached the parked cars, forcing her to change direction. "Stop!" Earl yelled, his voice laced with urgency. He wasn't sure what she was planning, but the gas container in her hand and her frantic escape set off alarm bells in his head. Was she stealing gas to sell on the black market? Or worse, was she planning some kind of crime? Maybe she wanted to set something on fire. Despite his tired legs, Earl pushed himself harder. He couldn't let her disappear again with that flammable liquid. But the woman was surprisingly fast. She weaved between parked cars, and her thin frame made her a difficult target. The woman was running toward some buildings in the rundown part of the town. That was when her luck ran out. She stumbled as her foot caught on a crack in the pavement. With a yelp, she fell hard on her right, and the container flew from her grasp. It landed hard on the floor, and the gas from it spilled everywhere. Earl rushed over to her, his concern momentarily overriding his anger. He knelt beside the woman, who was now clutching her arm and whimpering in pain. He helped her sit up, but he noticed she was more concerned with the wasted gasoline than with her sprained arm. It was then that Earl noticed a faded sticker on the dented container. It read, "Life Support Machine." Earl became curious. "Life support?" he asked gently. He looked around. The gas station was close to a deserted part of town, full of old houses that were almost always in darkness. He looked up and saw the rundown building where the woman had been headed. He knew the place often suffered from power outages. He pointed towards the building and asked her if there was someone there who needed the gas. The woman looked up at him, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. The answer would change everything. As she spoke, she began to cry. She told Earl that her son needed the gas to survive. Earl still had not gotten the full picture. A child was involved in this. Siphoning gas for a child. It didn't add up. He hesitantly followed her gaze towards the dark buildings. One in particular stood out. It was the only one with a single flickering light. Her son was in there. The woman nodded as she wiped her tears with a trembling hand. As she pointed to the gas container, she explained that her son needed the gas for his machine. There were power outages, and she couldn't afford gas. Earl's mouth fell. A machine on gasoline? That sounded incredibly dangerous. But the fear in the woman's eyes spoke volumes. He cautiously stepped closer to the building and peered through the dirty window. Inside, Earl saw a small figure lying in a bed. It was a child, a critically ill child. There was a network of tubes snaking from his tiny body to a large machine beside him. Earl felt relief at first, and it washed over his anger. This wasn't a criminal act. This was a mother desperate to save her son. He understood that desperation all too well. His own little girl, Anna, was battling cancer, and the fear of losing her was a constant companion. Even with the medical bills, he still fought to keep her alive. Earl turned back to the mother and gently asked what happened to her son. That was when the woman poured out her story. Her son, Daniel, had suffered a severe case of heart failure. The doctor said he needed a transplant, but there was no guarantee he would even get on the waiting list because they didn't have insurance, and the waiting list for the transplant was excruciatingly long. The doctors offered a little hope as they said that without a transplant, his body would fail. Earl didn't need her to finish before he understood the weight of what she was facing. He saw a reflection of his own fear in her tear-filled eyes. The woman continued explaining how they'd managed to get a home-based life support machine, an ECMO, but the frequent power outages threatened Daniel's life. She had resorted to using gasoline in a makeshift generator to power the life machine. It was a terrifying gamble fueled by a mother's love. As Earl looked back at the gas container, he fully understood that he could see the makeshift generator being powered by the siphoned gas. He understood the fear and helplessness that gripped a parent facing a child's illness. She had been siphoning gas to run the generator to power the life machine. The generator was makeshift, and she had built it with scraps by herself. It wasn't perfect, and it kept cutting out, but it was all she had. The life machine was the only thing keeping her son alive. and she couldn't let him go, even though it had consumed all the money she had. Earl watched as the woman buried her face in her hands and began crying. By now, his anger and confusion had been replaced by sympathy. He knelt beside her, held her, and told her he understood. A parent would do anything to save their child, and he knew that feeling all too well. The lengths a parent would go to for their child's well-being went above reason and sometimes even the law. "But it's dangerous," he added. The makeshift generator was in terrible condition, and the fumes could cause a fire. But the woman knew that. She told him she had no choice but to make do with what she had. She had borrowed all she could, and now she had less than nothing left. Earl felt so hurt standing beside a mother driven to such desperate measures. He knew he had to help somehow. So, he took out his phone and told her that they needed to get someone here to help. The police or an ambulance would be a good start, but the woman did something surprising. She flinched and slapped the phone out of his hand. She begged him not to call anyone, as they'd only take her son away. They wouldn't try to understand, and they would take him back to the hospital where they don't have enough life support machines for everyone there. His needs would not be attended to because of lack of payment or insurance, and she would lose her son, but Earl was experienced enough to know that the child would not survive that long on a dangerous generator and siphon gas. The community felt for her. Donations poured in for the child's treatment. A company offered enough money to secure a proper apartment with stable electricity. Another gifted a new backup generator, and an agency even brought a lawyer to help with her insurance. More importantly, help arrived for her son. He was taken to the big specialist hospital in town and received regular medical checkups. The outpouring of support left Earl speechless. He'd taken a chance at being compassionate, and it seemed to be paying off. The woman's name was Clara, and as Earl learned more about her situation, his heart ached for her. Earl was hesitant at first, but he shared his own story about his daughter, Anna, who was battling cancer. Clara's eyes welled up with tears when he told her. She felt his pain and insisted that he visit her. Earl was surprised by her request, yet he was happy because perhaps a visit from another child facing her own battle could be uplifting for both of them. Clara visited Anna, and the next week, Earl took Anna and Clara to visit Daniel at the hospital. Anna had to be moved around on a special chair with tubes running into her arms, but she lit up at the sight of Daniel. The two kids spent the afternoon discussing what they liked and their imaginative stories. A bond formed between Earl and Clara because of a shared understanding of the love and fear that comes with having a sick child. As days turned into weeks, Earl learned more about her son, Daniel. He was a bright-eyed 8-year-old with a love for dinosaurs. Then, sadness came knocking. Weeks later, the news Earl had been dreading arrived. Anna's condition had worsened. Despite all the treatments, her tiny body couldn't fight any longer. Earl felt the world crumble around him as grief threatened to crush his chest. Days later, little Anna passed away. But before Anna passed on, she did something selfless. Despite her young age, she wished that her friend Daniel would get her heart. She did not want him to suffer anymore. Earl agreed with her selfless decision. His daughter may be gone, but she had the chance to give life to another child. Earl informed Clara about Anna, and the news touched her. She held his hand and hugged him as their shared grief became an unexpected bond. When Earl told her about the organ donation, Clara began to cry. Earl had been too kind to her, she thought. Then came the news that brought joy to Clara and Earl. The heart was a perfect match for Daniel. Daniel's heart transplant surgery was a success, and soon enough, the little boy began to recover remarkably well. Clara was overcome with gratitude as she reached out to Earl. She thanked him for everything and thanked Anna for giving Daniel a second chance. Earl was pleased to know his daughter's heart was beating in someone's chest. Months passed, and as Daniel recovered, a new chapter began for Earl and Clara. Their shared ordeal, including the grief of losing Anna, intertwined with the joy of Daniel having a new chance at life, brought them closer. Their initial bond of compassion blossomed into something deeper. One evening at the hospital, Earl held Clara's hand, and they knew they were meant to be together. The gas station incident, which began with suspicion and fear, had transformed into something beautiful. It showed the power of compassion and how a single act of understanding could create a wave of generosity and ultimately save a life.